The morning mist clung to the ancient stone walls of Aldermore Palace like a gentle shroud, carrying with it the weight of centuries and the whispers of countless royal secrets. Guard Captain Marcus Blackwood stood at his post near the Queen's private gardens, his red uniform immaculate despite the early hour. The brass buttons caught the first rays of sunlight that managed to pierce through the London fog, creating small sparkles across his chest. Marcus had served the crown for 23 years, through 3 different monarchs, but none had commanded his respect quite like Queen Isabella the Beloved. She had ruled with grace, wisdom, and an unexpected warmth that endeared her to both her subjects and those who served within the palace walls. Her sudden passing 6 months ago had left a void that seemed to echo through every corridor of the grand residence. The sound of small paws clicking against the marble floors drew Marcus's attention. A small, golden corgi with distinctive white markings around her chest came trotting down the hallway, her tail wagging with the kind of enthusiasm that only dogs seem to possess. This was Duchess, Queen Isabella's most cherished companion, a dog who had rarely left the late Queen's side during her final years. "Good morning, Your Grace," Marcus said softly, using the affectionate title that Queen Isabella had always used for her beloved pet. The dog looked up at him with bright, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold an almost human understanding of the changes that had swept through the palace. Duchess had been struggling since the Queen's death. The palace staff had noticed her wandering the corridors, searching for her mistress, her small whimpers echoing through rooms that now felt too empty, too quiet. She would often be found lying outside Queen Isabella's former bedroom, waiting patiently for a door that would never open again. The new queen consort, Margaret Thornfield, had married King Edmund just 3 months after Queen Isabella's funeral. The marriage had been arranged quickly, some said too quickly, for political reasons that Marcus didn't pretend to understand. What he did understand was that Queen Margaret had little patience for what she called the old regime's sentimentalities. Marcus heard the sharp clicking of heels approaching long before he saw Queen Margaret appear at the end of the corridor. She walked with purpose, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her navy blue dress perfectly pressed and adorned with the royal jewelry that had once belonged to Queen Isabella. Behind her walked Lady Catherine Wells, her personal secretary, a thin woman with nervous eyes who seemed to jump at every shadow. "Captain Blackwood," Queen Margaret's voice carried the authority of her new position, though Marcus noticed it lacked the natural warmth that had made Queen Isabella's commands feel more like gentle requests. "Your Majesty," Marcus replied with a respectful bow, his eyes never leaving the Queen's face. Queen Margaret's gaze fell upon Duchess, who had settled herself near Marcus's feet, seemingly content in the guard's presence. A frown creased the Queen's forehead, and Marcus felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. "That animal," Queen Margaret began, her tone suggesting that she was addressing a problem rather than a living creature, "has become quite the nuisance. Yesterday, she disrupted an important meeting with the French ambassadors by barking incessantly. The day before, she somehow found her way into the state dining room during a formal dinner." Marcus remained silent, though he knew perfectly well why Duchess had been acting out. The dog was grieving, searching for comfort in a world that had suddenly become foreign and unwelcoming. "I've made a decision," Queen Margaret continued, adjusting her pearl necklace with one gloved hand. "The animal will be relocated to the countryside. There's a lovely farm in Yorkshire where she can run freely and won't be a distraction to the serious business of running a kingdom." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He knew what Queen Margaret was really saying. Duchess wasn't going to a farm. She was being sent away to live with strangers, to spend her remaining years confused and heartbroken, separated from everything and everyone she had ever known. "Your Majesty," Marcus began carefully, "with respect, Duchess has been a part of this palace for 8 years. Queen Isabella often said that the dog was like a daughter to her. Perhaps there might be another solution. Queen Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. Captain Blackwood, I appreciate your sentiment. However, I am the queen now, and I will decide what is best for this household. The arrangements have already been made. The dog will be collected this afternoon. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. This afternoon. In just a few hours, Duchess would be taken from the only home she had ever known, loaded into a car, and driven away forever. He looked down at the Corgi, who seemed to sense the tension in the air and had moved closer to his leg. Your Majesty, Marcus tried again. Queen Isabella left specific instructions regarding Duchess's care. She wanted the dog to remain in the palace, to be looked after by the staff who knew her. Queen Isabella, Queen Margaret's voice became cold, is dead. Her wishes, while touching, are no longer relevant to the practical needs of running this palace. I have no intention of allowing sentiment to interfere with efficiency. Lady Catherine Wells shifted uncomfortably behind the Queen, her eyes darting between Marcus and her employer. The secretary seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, though she remained silent. Marcus felt a fire building in his chest, a rage that he hadn't experienced since his early days as a young soldier. Queen Isabella had been more than just a monarch to those who served her. She had been a motherly figure, someone who remembered birthdays, who asked about family members, who treated even the lowest-ranking servants with dignity and respect. Your Majesty, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. I must respectfully disagree. Duchess is not just a pet. She is a living connection to Queen Isabella's memory. The people of this country loved their queen, and many of them followed the stories of her and her corgis in the newspapers. Sending Duchess away would be seen as... As what, Captain? Queen Margaret interrupted, stepping closer to Marcus. Are you suggesting that I am somehow betraying Queen Isabella's memory? Are you questioning my judgment as your queen? The corridor fell silent, except for the distant ticking of an ancient grandfather clock. Marcus knew he was walking on dangerous ground. Guards had been dismissed for far less than questioning a royal decision. But as he looked down at Duchess, who was now sitting pressed against his leg, her warm body trembling slightly, he found that he didn't care about the consequences. I am saying, Your Majesty, that some things are more important than convenience. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Lady Catherine Wells gasped audibly, and even Queen Margaret seemed taken aback by the guard's boldness. I see, Queen Margaret said slowly. Captain Blackwood, you seem to have forgotten your place. You are a guard, not an advisor. Your job is to protect the royal family and follow orders, not to question them. Marcus straightened to his full height, his military bearing evident in every line of his body. My job, Your Majesty, is to protect the crown and everything it represents. Queen Isabella understood that the crown is more than just political power. It's about honor, tradition, and compassion. Duchess represents all of those things. Queen Margaret's face flushed with anger. How dare you lecture me about the crown? I am the queen, and I will not be instructed by a mere guard about what the monarchy represents. Then perhaps, Marcus said quietly, you don't understand what you've truly inherited. The silence that followed was deafening. Lady Catherine Wells looked as though she might faint, while Queen Margaret stared at Marcus with a mixture of shock and fury that he had never seen on a royal face before. Marcus knew that he had just ended his career with those words. 23 years of faithful service, of standing in rain and snow, of missing family gatherings and personal milestones, all thrown away in a moment of defiance. But as Duchess looked up at him with trusting eyes, he felt no regret. Queen Margaret's voice, when she finally spoke, was ice cold. Captain Blackwood, you are relieved of your duties, effective immediately. You will remove yourself from palace grounds within the hour. As for the dog, the arrangements remain unchanged. She will be collected this afternoon as planned. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand, Your Majesty. But even as he spoke the words of submission, his mind was racing. He had lost his position, but the battle for Duchess was far from over. As he began to remove his ceremonial sword from its sheath, the first step in the process of turning in his uniform and equipment, an idea began to form. Lady Catherine, Queen Margaret said, turning to her secretary, please ensure that security is notified of Captain Blackwood's dismissal. I want him escorted from the premises. Lady Catherine nodded nervously. Yes, Your Majesty. Should I also confirm the arrangements for the dog's departure? Yes. The sooner this unpleasantness is resolved, the better. As Queen Margaret turned to leave, her heels clicking authoritatively on the marble floor, Marcus knelt down beside Duchess. The Corgi looked up at him with those intelligent brown eyes, and for a moment, Marcus could swear he saw Queen Isabella's gentle spirit looking back at him. Don't worry, old girl, he whispered, scratching behind her ears. This isn't over. But it would have to wait. For now, Marcus had to play the part of the dismissed guard, accepting his fate with dignity while secretly planning his next move. He had connections throughout the palace, people who had loved Queen Isabella as much as he had, who understood that Duchess was more than just a dog. As he walked toward the guard room to begin the process of turning in his equipment, Marcus's mind was already working on a plan. He thought about Thomas Brighton, the head groundskeeper, who had worked at the palace for 30 years and who had often been seen slipping treats to Duchess during her garden walks with Queen Isabella. There was also Margaret Sinclair, the head housekeeper, who had been present at Queen Isabella's deathbed and who had promised the dying queen that she would look after all her beloved pets. Most importantly, there was Lord James Aldworth, Queen Isabella's cousin and one of the few members of the royal family who had openly expressed concerns about the speed of King Edmund's remarriage. Lord James held significant influence in royal circles and had been known to clash with Queen Margaret on matters of protocol and tradition. As Marcus reached the guard room, he found his fellow guards waiting for him with expressions of sympathy and confusion. Word of his dismissal had already spread through the palace staff's efficient communication network. Marcus, called out Sergeant William Hayes, a man who had served alongside Marcus for 15 years. What happened? The rumors are flying, but no one knows the real story. Marcus looked around the room at the faces of men who had become like brothers to him over the years. These were good men, loyal to the crown and devoted to their duty. They deserved to know the truth. I stood up for something that mattered, Marcus said simply. Queen Margaret wants to send Duchess away, and I couldn't stand by and watch it happen. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Everyone knew how much Queen Isabella had loved her corgis, and the idea of Duchess being sent away struck many of them as a betrayal of the late Queen's memory. That's madness, said Corporal David Mitchell, a young guard who had only been at the palace for 2 years, but who had quickly developed a soft spot for the royal pets. Duchess has been part of this place longer than Queen Margaret has. Careful, David, Marcus warned. You still have to work here. Don't let my situation cost you your career. But even as he spoke the warning, Marcus could see the anger and disappointment in his fellow guards' eyes. He wasn't the only one who felt that Queen Margaret's decision was wrong. As Marcus began the process of returning his equipment, each piece feeling heavier than usual, he made mental notes of everyone who expressed sympathy or anger about Duchess's fate. These would be the people he would need to contact, the ones who might be willing to help him find a way to save the corgi. The clock on the guard room wall showed that it was already 10:30 in the morning. According to Queen Margaret, Duchess would be collected sometime that afternoon. Marcus estimated he had perhaps 4 or 5 hours to put together a plan that could save the dog without getting anyone else fired or worse. As he handed over his ceremonial sword to Sergeant Hayes, Marcus caught sight of a familiar figure in the doorway. Lady Catherine Wells stood there nervously, her hands clasped in front of her like a student called to the headmaster's office. "Captain Blackwood," she said softly, "Her Majesty has asked me to inform you that you have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings and leave the premises." Marcus nodded. "I understand. Thank you for the message, Lady Catherine." But as the secretary turned to leave, Marcus noticed something in her expression, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there during the confrontation with Queen Margaret. "Lady Catherine," Marcus called softly, causing her to pause in the doorway. "May I ask you something?" She turned back, her eyes darting nervously down the corridor to ensure they weren't being overheard. "What is it, Captain?" "Did you ever meet Queen Isabella?" The question seemed to catch Lady Catherine off guard. She blinked several times before answering. "Yes, I did. Twice, actually. Once at a charity function and once during the transition period after her death." "What did you think of her?" Lady Catherine was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see her struggling with the question. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "She was kind. Genuinely kind. She asked me about my family, remembered details from our previous conversation. She made me feel like I mattered, even though I was just a secretary from a minor noble family." Marcus nodded. "That sounds like her. She had a gift for making everyone feel important." "Yes," Lady Catherine agreed, a wistful smile crossing her face. "She did. Then you understand why I couldn't stand by and watch Duchess be sent away. That dog was like a child to Queen Isabella. Abandoning her would be like abandoning a piece of the Queen's heart." Lady Catherine's face went pale, and she glanced nervously down the corridor again. "Captain, I cannot discuss royal decisions. My position—" "I'm not asking you to discuss anything," Marcus said gently. "I'm just asking you to remember Queen Isabella's kindness and to consider whether what's happening to Duchess honors that memory." Without waiting for a response, Marcus turned back to his locker and continued packing his personal belongings. But he had seen the conflict in Lady Catherine's eyes, and he knew that his words had found their mark. As Marcus finished collecting his belongings, placing his few personal items into a small duffel bag, he felt the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. For 23 years, this palace had been his home, these corridors his territory to protect. Now he was walking away from it all for the sake of a small Corgi who couldn't even understand what was happening to her. But as he thought about Queen Isabella's gentle smile and the way she had always stopped to pet Duchess during their daily walks through the gardens, Marcus knew he had made the right choice. Some things were worth more than a career, more than security, more than following orders without question. The future was uncertain, but Marcus Blackwood was no longer just a palace guard. He was now a man on a mission, determined to honor the memory of a queen who had understood that true nobility came not from titles or power, but from compassion and loyalty to those who depended on you. As he prepared to leave the palace for what might be the last time, Marcus took one final look around the guard room that had been his second home for so many years. Tomorrow, another guard would stand at his post, protect the corridors he had walked, and follow orders without question. But tonight, Marcus would begin the fight of his life to save a small Corgi whose only crime was missing the woman who had loved her most. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Aldermore's courtyard as Marcus Blackwood stood outside the palace gates for the first time in over 2 decades without wearing his red uniform. The civilian clothes felt foreign against his skin, like a costume that didn't quite fit. He checked his pocket watch. It was already 2 o'clock, and according to Lady Catherine's earlier announcement, Duchess would be collected sometime this afternoon. Marcus had spent the last 3 hours moving carefully through London, using his extensive knowledge of the palace's staff schedules and locations to arrange discreet meetings with potential allies. His first stop had been the Rose and Crown, a modest pub frequented by off-duty palace employees, where he had managed to catch Thomas Brighton during his lunch break. Thomas Brighton was a weathered man in his 50s, with hands permanently stained green from decades of tending the royal gardens. His love for Queen Isabella had been evident in the way he had meticulously maintained her favorite flower beds, ensuring that her morning walks were always through landscapes of perfect beauty. "This is madness, Marcus," Thomas had said, shaking his gray head as he nursed a pint of bitter. "That little dog has been wandering the garden since she was a puppy. She knows every path, every hiding spot behind the rose bushes. Queen Isabella used to say that Duchess could find her way through the gardens blindfolded." "Then you understand why I can't let this happen," Marcus had replied. "Duchess isn't just losing her home, she's losing her entire world." Thomas had studied Marcus's face for a long moment before nodding slowly. "What do you need me to do?" Now, as Marcus waited across from the palace gates, he felt the weight of the plan he and Thomas had hastily constructed. It was risky, possibly illegal, and would certainly end several careers if they were caught. But it was their only chance to save Duchess. The plan relied on Margaret Sinclair, the head housekeeper, who had agreed to meet with Marcus despite the risk to her position. Margaret was a formidable woman who had served the royal family for 35 years, starting as a young maid and working her way up through sheer competence and unwavering loyalty. She had been one of Queen Isabella's closest confidants and had been present during the Queen's final days. Marcus made his way to St. Margaret's Church, a small chapel that sat just outside the palace grounds and served as the primary place of worship for palace staff. Margaret Sinclair was waiting for him in the back pew, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her expression grave but determined. "Marcus," she whispered as he slid into the pew beside her, "I've been thinking about our conversation all morning. What Queen Margaret is doing, it's wrong. It's a betrayal of everything Queen Isabella stood for." Margaret's voice carried the authority of someone who had witnessed decades of royal history. She had seen monarchs rise and fall, had weathered political storms and personal tragedies, but Marcus had never seen her look as troubled as she did at that moment. "I was there when Queen Isabella died," Margaret continued, her voice growing softer. Her last words weren't about affairs of state or political concerns. She looked at me with those tired eyes and said, "Promise me you'll take care of my babies." She meant her corgis, Marcus. All of them. It was the last request of a dying woman, and I promised her I would honor it. Marcus felt a surge of hope. "Then you'll help us?" Margaret nodded firmly. "I've already spoken to the other senior staff members. We're all in agreement. Queen Margaret may be our queen now, but she doesn't understand what Queen Isabella meant to this place, to this country. Duchess is more than just a pet. She's a symbol of the love and warmth that once filled these halls." "What about the collection? Do we know who's coming for her and when?" Margaret's expression darkened. "I made some inquiries. A man named Harold Pettigrew is supposed to collect Duchess at 4 o'clock. He runs what he calls an animal relocation service, but from what I've heard, it's little more than a business that disposes of unwanted pets for wealthy clients who don't want to deal with the emotional burden themselves." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. He had hoped that Queen Margaret had at least arranged for Duchess to go to a legitimate rescue organization or a loving family. The reality was far worse than he had imagined. "We can't let that happen," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "No," Margaret agreed. "We can't. But we need to be smart about this. If we're caught interfering with a direct royal order, it won't just cost us our jobs. We could be charged with theft of royal property." Marcus had already considered this possibility. The legal ramifications of what they were planning could be severe. But as he thought about Duchess's trusting brown eyes and the way she had pressed against his leg that morning, seeking comfort in a world that had suddenly become cold and hostile, he found that he didn't care about the consequences. "What do you suggest?" he asked. Margaret looked around the empty church, ensuring they were truly alone. "Lord James Aldworth is in London today. He's staying at his townhouse in Belgravia. I've already sent word to him about the situation." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Will he see us?" "He's expecting you at 3:30. Lord James was very close to Queen Isabella, and he's been increasingly concerned about some of Queen Margaret's decisions. He has the authority to intervene in matters concerning the late Queen's personal effects, which technically includes her pets." This was better than Marcus had dared to hope. Lord James Aldworth was not only Queen Isabella's cousin, but also a respected member of Parliament and a senior member of the royal household. If anyone could challenge Queen Margaret's decision legally and effectively, it would be him. "There's something else," Margaret continued. "I've spoken with Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the royal veterinarian. She's willing to provide documentation stating that relocating Duchess at this time could be detrimental to the dog's health due to the stress of losing Queen Isabella. It's not much, but it might provide additional legal grounds for Lord James to intervene." Marcus felt a flicker of admiration for Margaret's thoroughness. In just a few hours, she had constructed a network of allies and gathered documentation that could support their cause. It was a reminder of why she had risen to become head housekeeper despite starting as a lowly maid. "What about Thomas? Where does he fit into all this?" Margaret smiled for the first time since their conversation had begun. "Thomas has the most important job of all. At exactly 4 o'clock, when Harold Pettigrew arrives to collect Duchess, Thomas will ensure that the dog cannot be found." The simplicity of the plan was both its strength and its weakness. While Pettigrew searched for Duchess, Marcus would be meeting with Lord James, hopefully obtaining some form of legal intervention that would protect the dog permanently. But if Lord James couldn't or wouldn't help, they would have gained nothing but time. "What if Lord James refuses to help?" Marcus asked. Margaret's expression grew stern. "Then we moved to Plan B. I've been in contact with several animal welfare organizations that specialize in rescuing pets from difficult situations. They've agreed to provide sanctuary for Duchess if necessary, even if it means keeping her location secret for a while." Marcus was impressed by Margaret's foresight. She had clearly thought through multiple contingencies, understanding that their first attempt might fail. "There's one more thing," Margaret added, lowering her voice even further. "Lady Catherine Wells approached me this afternoon. She seems conflicted about Queen Margaret's decision. She asked several questions about Queen Isabella's relationship with her pets and seemed genuinely distressed about Duchess being sent away." This was interesting news. Marcus remembered the uncertainty in Lady Catherine's eyes during their brief conversation at the guardroom. If Queen Margaret's own secretary was having doubts about the decision, it might indicate broader concerns within the royal household. "Do you think she might be willing to help?" Margaret shook her head slowly. "I don't think she's ready to actively oppose Queen Margaret, but she might be willing to delay things if necessary. Perhaps forget to confirm the collection time or accidentally provide incorrect information about Duchess's location." It wasn't much, but Marcus knew that in situations like this, small delays and minor confusion could be crucial. Every minute they could buy might be the minute that made the difference. Marcus checked his watch again. It was almost 3 o'clock, which meant he needed to leave soon to make his appointment with Lord James. As he prepared to stand, Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Marcus, I want you to know that what you did this morning took real courage. Standing up to Queen Margaret, knowing it would cost you everything. That's the kind of loyalty Queen Isabella inspired in all of us. She would have been proud of you." The words touched Marcus more deeply than he had expected. For the past few hours, he had been focused on action, on planning and strategy. He hadn't allowed himself to think about the emotional weight of what had happened, the loss of not just his career, but his identity as a palace guard. "Thank you, Margaret. That means more to me than you know." As Marcus left the church and made his way through the streets of London toward Lord James's townhouse, he reflected on the strange turns his life had taken in just one day. This morning, he had been Captain Marcus Blackwood, a respected member of the Palace Guard with a secure future and a clear sense of purpose. Now, he was essentially a rebel, plotting against the crown he had sworn to serve, all for the sake of a small corgi. But as he thought about Queen Isabella's gentle smile and the way she had always treated her staff with such genuine kindness, Marcus felt certain that he was fighting for something larger than just one dog's welfare. He was fighting for the values that had made Queen Isabella beloved by her people, values that seemed to be disappearing from the palace under Queen Margaret's rule. Lord James Aldworth's townhouse was an elegant Georgian building in one of Belgravia's most prestigious squares. As Marcus approached the front door, he could feel the weight of his civilian clothes and his lack of official credentials. Just this morning, he could have walked into any government building in London and been treated with the respect due to a palace guard. Now he was just another citizen, hoping that a member of the nobility would agree to see him. The butler who answered the door was a thin, elderly man with kind eyes who seemed to recognize Marcus despite his change of clothes. "Captain Blackwood, I presume? Lord James is expecting you. Please follow me." As Marcus was led through the elegantly appointed hallway, lined with portraits of Aldworth ancestors and landscapes of the family's country estates, he tried to prepare himself for the conversation ahead. Lord James had a reputation as a fair but pragmatic man, someone who understood both the importance of tradition and the necessity of political realities. Convincing him to intervene would require presenting the case for Duchess not just as an emotional appeal, but as a matter of principle and public interest. Lord James Aldworth was waiting in his study, a book-lined room that spoke of generations of learning and thoughtful consideration. He was a man in his late 50s, with the kind of distinguished bearing that came naturally to those born into positions of responsibility. His resemblance to Queen Isabella was evident in the shape of his eyes and the gentle curve of his mouth. "Captain Blackwood," Lord James said, rising from behind his desk and extending his hand, "I was saddened to hear about this morning's events. Please sit down and tell me exactly what happened." Marcus took the offered seat and began his account of the confrontation with Queen Margaret. Lord James listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave as the story unfolded. "I see," Lord James said when Marcus had finished. "And you believe that Queen Margaret's decision is not in the best interests of the crown?" "I believe, my lord, that it represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what the crown means to the British people. Queen Isabella's love for her corgis wasn't just a personal quirk. It was part of what made her human and relatable to ordinary citizens. Duchess is a living symbol of that connection." Lord James nodded thoughtfully. "You make an interesting point. The public's relationship with the royal family has always been built partly on these human moments, these glimpses of the people behind the crowns and titles." "Exactly, my lord. And beyond the symbolic importance, there's the simple matter of honoring Queen Isabella's wishes. She specifically requested that her pets be cared for by people who knew and loved them." "Yes. I'm aware of Isabel's feelings on this matter. She spoke to me about it several times during her final illness." Lord James was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "The question is, whether I have the legal authority to intervene in what Queen Margaret considers a household management decision." Marcus felt his heart sink. "You don't think you can help?" "I didn't say that," Lord James replied with a slight smile. I said it was a question of legal authority, and as it happens, I've been doing some research since Margaret Sinclair contacted me earlier today. Lord James opened a leather-bound folder on his desk and withdrew several documents. As executor of Queen Isabella's estate and as her designated representative in matters concerning her personal effects, I do have certain authorities that extend beyond her death. The question is whether those authorities apply to living creatures that were considered part of her personal household. Marcus leaned forward, hope returning to his voice. And what have you discovered? That the law in this area is wonderfully ambiguous, Lord James said with satisfaction. Queen Isabella's will specifically mentions the care of her beloved animal companions and designates funds for their lifetime care. It could be argued that any decision to relocate these animals should be made in consultation with the estate's executor, namely me. Does that mean you can stop the collection? Lord James checked his own pocket watch. It's 3:45 now. If we move quickly, I can contact Queen Margaret and request a delay pending a legal review of the situation. It won't solve the problem permanently, but it will buy us time to explore other options. Marcus felt a surge of relief, but he also knew that a temporary delay was just the beginning. Queen Margaret would not give up easily, and she had the ultimate authority as the reigning queen consort. What other options are you considering? Well, Lord James said, leaning back in his chair, there are several possibilities. We could petition for Duchess to be declared a ward of Queen Isabella's estate, which would place her under my protection indefinitely. We could arrange for her adoption by a member of the royal family who would ensure proper care. Or we could work with animal welfare organizations to find her a suitable home while maintaining some connection to the palace. Each option had its merits, but Marcus could see potential problems with all of them. The legal route could take months or even years, during which Duchess's fate would remain uncertain. Adoption by another royal family member would depend on their willingness to take on what Queen Margaret clearly saw as a burden. And placement with an animal welfare organization, while ensuring good care, would still mean separating Duchess from her home. Is there no way to keep her at the palace? Lord James sighed deeply. That would require changing Queen Margaret's mind, and from what you've told me about this morning's confrontation, that seems unlikely. She appears to have made this decision based on what she sees as practical considerations, and she's not someone who admits to being wrong. The sound of a telephone ringing interrupted their conversation. Lord James picked up the receiver, listened for a moment, then covered the mouthpiece with his hand. "It's Margaret Sinclair," he said to Marcus. "Harold Pettigrew has arrived at the palace, and they can't find Duchess anywhere." Marcus couldn't help but smile. Thomas Brighton had done his job perfectly. "Tell them you're ordering a delay pending a legal review," Marcus suggested. Lord James nodded and spoke into the telephone. "Margaret?" "Yes. I'm aware of the situation. Please inform Queen Margaret that I'm invoking my authority as executor of Queen Isabella's estate to postpone any decisions regarding her animal companions pending a thorough legal review. Yes, I understand she won't be pleased. No, this is not a request. It's a legal requirement. Thank you." As Lord James hung up the telephone, Marcus felt a mixture of victory and apprehension. They had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now," Lord James said, "we have perhaps 24 hours to find a permanent solution. Queen Margaret will certainly consult with the royal lawyers, and they'll probably find a way to override my authority within a day or two. We need to use that time wisely." Marcus nodded, understanding the urgency of their situation. But for the moment, Duchess was safe. Still somewhere in the palace grounds under Thomas Brighton's protection. It was more than he had dared to hope for just a few hours earlier. As if reading his thoughts, Lord James smiled. "Don't look so worried, Captain. We've accomplished something significant today. We've shown that Queen Margaret's authority is not absolute, that there are people willing to stand up for what they believe is right. That's not a small thing. But even as Lord James spoke these encouraging words, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that their real challenges lay ahead. Queen Margaret had been publicly defied, her authority questioned, her decision delayed. She would not forget this humiliation, and her response would likely be swift and decisive. As Marcus prepared to leave Lord James's townhouse, he realized that he was no longer fighting just for Duchess's welfare. This had become a battle for the soul of the monarchy itself, a conflict between two very different visions of what the royal family should represent to the British people. The next 24 hours would determine not just Duchess's fate, but the future of everyone who had chosen to stand against Queen Margaret's cold vision of royal duty. Marcus only hoped they would prove strong enough for the fight that was coming. The rain that had threatened all morning finally began to fall as dawn broke over London the next day. Marcus Blackwood stood at the window of the small hotel room he had rented near Victoria Station, watching the droplets streak down the glass like tears. He had barely slept, his mind racing with possibilities and concerns about what the day would bring. The telephone beside his bed rang sharply at exactly 7 o'clock in the morning. Marcus answered it to find Margaret Sinclair's voice on the other end, tense with urgency. "Marcus, you need to know what's happening here. Queen Margaret called an emergency meeting with the senior staff at 6 this morning. She's furious about yesterday's interference, and she's making it clear that anyone who helped you will face immediate dismissal." Marcus felt his stomach clench. Who's she targeting? Everyone who was involved or who she suspects was involved. She's already questioned Thomas about Duchess's disappearance yesterday, and she's demanding to know who gave you information about the collection arrangements. The atmosphere here is tense. This was what Marcus had feared most. His actions had not only endangered his own career, but had put good, loyal people at risk of losing their livelihoods. "What about Lord James's legal challenge?" Margaret's voice carried a note of disappointment. "The royal lawyers worked through the night. They found precedents that limit Lord James's authority over decisions made by the reigning monarch regarding palace operations. The legal delay he arranged yesterday was probably the best he could do." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of impending defeat. "So Queen Margaret can proceed with sending Duchess away?" She's scheduled another collection for this afternoon, and this time she's assigned palace security to ensure that nothing interferes with the process. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. The same security force he had once been part of would now be working against him, ensuring that Queen Margaret's will was carried out regardless of any moral objections. "There's something else," Margaret continued. "Lady Catherine Wells has been asking to speak with you. She seemed quite agitated when I saw her yesterday evening, and she specifically requested that I pass along a message if I spoke to you." This was unexpected. "What kind of message?" "She wants to meet with you this morning. She said it was important, something about information that might change the situation. She suggested the Serpentine Gallery in Hyde Park at 9 o'clock. Marcus glanced at his watch. That gave him less than 2 hours to get across London. "Did she say anything else?" "Only that you should come alone, and that this conversation never took place." After Margaret hung up, Marcus sat on the edge of the narrow hotel bed, trying to understand what Lady Catherine could possibly want to tell him. As Queen Margaret's personal secretary, she would have access to private conversations, confidential documents, and strategic plans. But she had also seemed genuinely conflicted about Duchess's fate during their brief interaction at the palace. The Serpentine Gallery was nearly empty when Marcus arrived, the early morning rain having discouraged most visitors. Lady Catherine was standing before a large abstract painting, her reflection wavering in the glass that protected the artwork. She was dressed more casually than Marcus had ever seen her, in a simple navy coat and practical shoes, without the formal attire that marked her as a member of the royal household. "Captain Blackwood," she said softly as he approached. "Thank you for coming." What did you want to tell me, Lady Catherine? She glanced around nervously, ensuring they were alone before speaking. Yesterday, after our conversation about Queen Isabella, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about honoring her memory and what she would have wanted for Duchess. Marcus waited patiently, sensing that Lady Catherine was building up to something important. Last night, I was working late in Queen Margaret's private office, filing correspondence, when I found something that changes everything. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a small folder. These are copies of letters that Queen Margaret has been exchanging with someone named Victoria Ashworth. The name meant nothing to Marcus, but Lady Catherine's expression suggested it should. Victoria Ashworth is Queen Margaret's sister, Lady Catherine explained. She runs a commercial breeding operation in Scotland that specializes in purebred dogs for wealthy clients. These letters make it clear that Queen Margaret never intended to send Duchess to a farm or animal sanctuary. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning rain. What do you mean? Lady Catherine opened the folder and showed him copies of handwritten letters. Victoria Ashworth has been asking Queen Margaret for months to provide her with some of Queen Isabella's prize corgis for breeding purposes. The bloodlines are incredibly valuable, and puppies descended from royal dogs can sell for thousands of pounds each. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Queen Margaret hadn't been trying to remove a nuisance from the palace. She had been planning to turn Queen Isabella's beloved pets into breeding stock for her sister's commercial operation. Duchess was supposed to be the first, Lady Catherine continued, her voice shaking with emotion. The plan was to claim she was being relocated for her own welfare, when actually she was going to spend the rest of her life in a breeding facility, producing puppies for wealthy buyers who wanted dogs with royal connections. Marcus stared at the letters in shock and growing fury. The cruelty of the plan was staggering. Duchess, who had spent her entire life as a cherished companion, would be reduced to nothing more than a breeding machine, valued only for her ability to produce profitable offspring. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. Lady Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "Because it's wrong. Because Queen Isabella trusted me to help manage her final affairs, and this betrays everything she believed in, and because I can't stand by and watch it happen without doing something to stop it." "What do you want me to do with this information?" "I don't know," Lady Catherine admitted. "I just know that someone needs to know the truth. Queen Margaret has been lying to everyone, including the staff members who were worried about Duchess's welfare. She's been presenting this as a practical decision when it's actually about personal profit." Marcus studied the letters more carefully, noting the dates and the specific arrangements that had been discussed. The correspondence went back several months, indicating that Queen Margaret had been planning this betrayal even before Queen Isabella's death. "If this information became public," Marcus said slowly, "it would create a scandal that could damage Queen Margaret's reputation permanently." Lady Catherine nodded miserably. "That's exactly why I don't know what to do. I can't be the person who destroys the royal family's reputation, but I also can't be part of something so fundamentally dishonest." Marcus understood her dilemma. As Queen Margaret's secretary, Lady Catherine had a duty of confidentiality that made any public disclosure extremely risky. But as someone who had been moved by Queen Isabella's kindness, she also had a moral obligation to prevent this betrayal. "What if there was a way to stop the plan without making the letters public?" Marcus suggested. "What if Queen Margaret could be convinced to change her mind through other means?" How? Marcus was beginning to form an idea, one that would require careful coordination and perfect timing. What if Queen Margaret discovered that her plan had been exposed, but didn't know how or by whom? What if she realized that proceeding with the breeding scheme would inevitably lead to a scandal, but was offered a way to back down gracefully? Lady Catherine looked at him with growing understanding. "You want to blackmail her?" "I want to give her a choice," Marcus corrected. She can continue with her plan and face the consequences when the truth comes out. Or she can find a different solution that preserves both Duchess's welfare and her own reputation. But how would you approach her? You're banned from the palace, and she would never agree to meet with you voluntarily. Marcus smiled grimly. Then we'll have to arrange for an involuntary meeting. The plan that Marcus outlined was audacious and risky, but Lady Catherine gradually came to see its potential effectiveness. It would require her to arrange for Queen Margaret to be in a specific location at a specific time, while Marcus found a way to present the evidence without directly implicating Lady Catherine as the source. "There's a charity luncheon this afternoon at the Dorchester Hotel," Lady Catherine said. "Queen Margaret is scheduled to make a speech about animal welfare of all things. The irony is almost too perfect. Can you ensure that she arrives early, perhaps for a private meeting with one of the charity organizers?" "I think so. I could arrange for her to arrive 30 minutes before the scheduled start time for what she thinks is a briefing session." Marcus nodded. "And I'll make sure that someone is waiting for her with information about her correspondence with her sister." "But who? It can't be you. She would have you arrested immediately." This was the crucial question. Marcus needed someone with enough authority and credibility to confront Queen Margaret effectively, someone she couldn't simply dismiss or ignore. The answer came to him suddenly. Lord James. He's already established his willingness to challenge Queen Margaret's decisions regarding Queen Isabella's pets. If he received anonymous information about the breeding scheme and confronted her with it, she would have to take him seriously. Lady Catherine looked uncertain. "Do you think he would be willing to do that?" If he understood what was really at stake, yes. Lord James loved Queen Isabella, and the idea that her sister-in-law would exploit her memory for profit would appall him. They spent the next hour refining the details of their plan. Lady Catherine would arrange for Queen Margaret to arrive early at the Dorchester Hotel, expecting a briefing about the charity luncheon. Meanwhile, Marcus would contact Lord James and provide him with copies of the letters, along with a request that he confront Queen Margaret privately before she could proceed with the afternoon collection of Duchess. As they prepared to leave the gallery, Lady Catherine turned to Marcus with a worried expression. "What if this doesn't work? What if Queen Margaret decides to proceed anyway?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Then we go to Plan B. We make the letters public and deal with the consequences. Sometimes protecting what's right is more important than protecting institutions, even royal ones." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of careful preparation and nervous anticipation. Marcus met with Lord James again, this time presenting him with copies of the damaging correspondence. The older man's reaction was everything Marcus had hoped for: shock, disgust, and cold anger at Queen Margaret's betrayal of her predecessor's trust. "This is unconscionable," Lord James said, studying the letters with growing outrage. "Isabel loved those dogs like children. The idea that Margaret would turn them into breeding stock for commercial profit. It's a betrayal of everything the royal family is supposed to represent. Will you confront her with this information?" Lord James's expression was grim but determined. "I'll do more than confront her. I'll make it clear that if she proceeds with this plan, these letters will find their way to every newspaper in Britain. The scandal would destroy her reputation and damage the monarchy itself." At the same time, Lady Catherine was carefully orchestrating Queen Margaret's schedule to ensure that she would be at the Dorchester Hotel at the appointed time. She arranged for what Queen Margaret thought was a last-minute briefing with the charity's leadership, scheduling it for 30 minutes before the main event. By 1 o'clock that afternoon, all the pieces were in place. Marcus waited in Hyde Park, near enough to the Dorchester Hotel to receive news quickly, but far enough away to avoid being seen by Queen Margaret or her security detail. His future, and more importantly Duchess's fate, now depended on whether Lord James could convince Queen Margaret to abandon her cruel scheme. The telephone call came at 2:15. It was Lord James, and Marcus could hear satisfaction in his voice even before he spoke. "It's done," Lord James said simply. "Queen Margaret has agreed to cancel the collection permanently. Duchess will remain at the palace, and there will be no more discussion of relocating Queen Isabella's pets." Marcus felt a wave of relief so powerful that his knees nearly buckled. "What did you say to her?" "I presented her with the letters and explained that her correspondence with her sister had been discovered. I made it clear that proceeding with the breeding scheme would result in a public scandal that could destroy her reputation and damage the monarchy itself." "How did she react?" Lord James chuckled grimly. "About as well as you would expect. She was furious, both at being caught and at having her authority challenged. But she's not stupid. She understood immediately that the political cost of proceeding would be catastrophic." "And Duchess?" "Will live out her days at the palace, cared for by the staff who knew and loved Queen Isabella. I've also arranged for a formal directive that establishes protection for all of the late Queen's pets, ensuring that this situation can never arise again." As Marcus hung up the telephone, he felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief at Duchess's rescue was overwhelmed by satisfaction at having successfully stood up to injustice, but also tempered by awareness of what this victory had cost him personally. That evening, Marcus received one final telephone call. It was Margaret Sinclair calling with news about the aftermath of the day's events. "Queen Margaret made an announcement to the senior staff this afternoon," Margaret reported. "She said that after careful consideration, she had decided that Queen Isabella's pets would remain at the palace as a tribute to the late Queen's memory." "Did she mention anything about the investigation into yesterday's interference?" Margaret's voice carried a note of amusement. "Oddly enough, that seems to have been forgotten entirely. In fact, Thomas Brighton has been commended for his dedication to the animals in his care, and there's been no further mention of disciplinary action against anyone." Marcus smiled. Queen Margaret was clearly trying to put the entire episode behind her as quickly as possible, which meant that the staff members who had helped him were safe from retaliation. "There's something else," Margaret continued. "Lord James has made a proposal regarding your situation." "What kind of proposal?" "He's offered you a position as head of security for Queen Isabella's Memorial Foundation. It's a new organization being established to preserve her legacy and continue her charitable work. The position would come with a salary equivalent to what you earned as a palace guard, along with a small cottage on Lord James's estate." Marcus was stunned. He had expected to spend weeks or months searching for new employment, probably in some entirely different field. The offer of work that would allow him to continue honoring Queen Isabella's memory was more than he had dared to hope for. The position would also include responsibility for overseeing the care of Queen Isabella's pets during the transition period, Margaret added. "Lord James thought you might find that aspect of the job particularly appealing." As Marcus considered Lord James's offer, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this point. 24 hours earlier, he had been a disgraced former guard with no job prospects and an uncertain future. Now he was being offered the chance to continue serving Queen Isabella's memory in a new capacity, while ensuring that Duchess and the other royal pets received the care they deserved. The following morning, Marcus returned to Aldermore Palace for the first time since his dismissal. But this time, he entered through the main gates as an honored guest of Lord James, who had arranged a final meeting between Marcus and Duchess. Thomas Brighton led them to the Queen's private gardens, where they found Duchess lying in a patch of sunlight near Queen Isabella's favorite rosebush. The Corgi looked up as they approached, her tail beginning to wag as she recognized Marcus. "Hello, old girl," Marcus said softly, kneeling down to scratch behind her ears. "I hear you're going to be staying home after all." Duchess responded with the kind of enthusiastic face-licking that only dogs can provide, seemingly understanding that the danger had passed and that her world was secure once again. As Marcus played with Duchess in the garden where Queen Isabella had spent so many peaceful mornings, he thought about the events that had brought them all to this point. A cruel plan had been defeated, not through violence or political maneuvering, but through the combined efforts of people who understood that some things were more important than convenience or profit. Thomas Brighton joined them in the garden, bringing news that made the victory even sweeter. "I thought you should know," he told Marcus, "that Lady Catherine Wells submitted her resignation this morning. She said she wanted to pursue opportunities that were more aligned with her personal values." Marcus wasn't surprised. Lady Catherine had shown tremendous courage in exposing Queen Margaret's scheme, and it was understandable that she would no longer feel comfortable serving someone who had betrayed such fundamental trust. "She's been offered a position with the Memorial Foundation as well," Lord James added. "Her organizational skills and her understanding of royal protocol will be invaluable as we work to establish Queen Isabella's legacy." As the afternoon sun began to set over the palace gardens, casting long shadows across the carefully maintained lawns, Marcus felt a deep sense of completion. The battle for Duchess had been won not just because a single dog had been saved from exploitation, but because good people had proven willing to stand up for what was right, regardless of personal cost. Queen Margaret remained the queen consort, her authority intact, but perhaps slightly diminished by the knowledge that her actions were being watched by those who remembered what true nobility looked like. She would continue to make decisions about palace operations, but she would do so with the awareness that Queen Isabella's memory was protected by people who would not hesitate to act if her legacy was threatened again. Marcus spent his final hour at the palace, walking through the corridors he had once patrolled, remembering the countless quiet moments he had shared with Queen Isabella during her daily routines. He thought about the woman who had ruled with such grace and compassion, who had understood that true power came not from the ability to command, but from the capacity to inspire love and loyalty in others. As he prepared to leave the palace for what might be the last time, Marcus stopped at the main entrance where a small brass plaque had been installed that very morning. It read, "In memory of Queen Isabella the Beloved, who understood that kindness is the highest form of wisdom." Below the plaque, someone had placed a small bouquet of roses and a handwritten note that simply said, "Thank you for showing us what it means to truly serve." Marcus smiled as he recognized the handwriting. It was from one of the young palace maids, someone whose name Queen Isabella had always remembered, whose family she had asked about, whose birthday she had never forgotten. As Marcus walked away from Aldermore Palace for the last time as a visitor, Duchess trotting contentedly beside him for a final walk through the grounds, he understood that he had been part of something larger than just saving one dog from an unpleasant fate. He had helped preserve the memory of a woman who had shown an entire nation what it meant to lead with love rather than fear, with compassion rather than cold authority. The future remained uncertain, but Marcus knew that Queen Isabella's legacy would endure, protected by people who understood that some values are worth defending, regardless of the cost. And in the gardens of Aldermore Palace, a small Corgi would continue to chase butterflies and nap in the afternoon sun, living proof that loyalty and love can triumph over even the coldest ambition. In the end, that was perhaps the greatest victory of all. Not just that justice had prevailed, but that kindness had proven stronger than cruelty, and that ordinary people, when united by common purpose, could protect what they held most dear. As the gates of Aldermore Palace closed behind them, Marcus looked down at Duchess, who gazed back at him with eyes full of trust and contentment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but today had been a day when everything that mattered had been preserved. Sometimes, Marcus thought, that was enough. Sometimes that was everything.